They say silence is golden, but sometimes silence is just a coffin for the truth, and I spent half my life digging my own grave. For 20 years, I wore the family guilt like a poorly fitted suit, one accusation after another, until I almost forgot what innocence felt like.
This is the story of how a shattered ceramic vase finally became the key to unlocking 2 decades of carefully constructed lies, and how the one person who always seemed perfect turned out to be the quiet architect of my destruction. I didn't choose to be the scapegoat. The role was assigned to me the moment I showed the slightest resistance to control. My sister, Sarah, was the sun around which my parents' world revolved, brilliant, delicate, and perpetually misunderstood by the cruel outside world. I, Elias, was the shadow, the necessary counterweight, the convenient sinkhole for all family anxieties and failures. If the electricity bill was late, it was because I distracted Mom. If the dog tracked mud into the foyer, it was because I left the door ajar, even if I hadn't been home all day. If Sarah cried, it was because I had inevitably been insensitive. The logic didn't matter. The outcome was immutable. The patterns started subtly, woven into the fabric of my childhood. I must have been 8 when the first major incident occurred, the disappearance of the $20 meant for Dad's birthday dinner. Mom's purse had been left on the kitchen counter, and the cash was gone. I was sitting at the dining table coloring, wholly absorbed in rendering a majestic, yet anatomically inaccurate dragon. The moment Mom's voice cracked, sharp and accusatory, the air in the room solidified. "Elias, where is the money?" I remember looking up, confused, crayons frozen above the paper. Sarah, who was 3 years older and possessed a precocious understanding of manipulation, was standing perfectly still in the doorway, her eyes wide and innocent, a picture of wounded virtue. I stammered a denial, but Mom didn't listen. She didn't look for evidence. She didn't check Sarah's room. She saw my distracted state, my messy workspace, and the verdict was instantaneous. "You're always so careless. You must have taken it out to buy candy and lost it somewhere. You have disappointed me deeply, Elias." The sting of that phrase, "you have disappointed me," was worse than any spanking. It wasn't just the punishment of being grounded for a week, confined to my room while Sarah was taken out for ice cream. It was the absolute, crushing certainty in my mother's voice that I was fundamentally dishonest. I sat in my room, staring at the faded wallpaper, trying desperately to recall a moment of taking the money, trying to rationalize how I could have done something so bad without remembering it. That day, I learned my first lesson. My truth was irrelevant. The family narrative required a villain, and I was nominated. The narrative gained momentum through high school. Sarah was a straight A student, always performing. I, too, worked hard, often struggling with subjects that came easily to her. When I received a B- in physics during my junior year, a grade that was still highly respectable, yet somehow catastrophic in our household, the dissection began immediately at the dinner table. A B? Honestly, Elias, you have no drive. If you weren't spending so much time moping or glued to that dreadful computer, you might actually achieve something, like your sister, Mom said, pushing the roast chicken around her plate with a frustrated sigh. Sarah, seated across from me, patted Mom's hand gently. "It's okay, Mom. Not everyone has the focus." Maybe Elias just needs to accept that he's better suited for trade work, something less demanding. What they never acknowledged was the reason for my supposed lack of focus. It was Sarah who had consistently crept into my room late at night, whispering anxieties and fears, forcing me into emotional labor to comfort her, distracting me until 2 a.m., only to wake up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for school, leaving me exhausted and unable to concentrate. It was Sarah who had once deleted an entire term paper from my desktop 3 hours before the deadline, claiming she thought it was a virus file, forcing me into a panicked, inferior rewrite that contributed directly to that B grade. When I confronted her later, she cried,
and Mom simply scolded me for bullying your sister when she was clearly trying to help. The constant erosion of my reality led me to develop a profound sense of emotional detachment. I stopped arguing. Arguing only provided fuel for their fire and confirmed my rebellious nature. I retreated into myself, becoming the quiet, surly son they already believed I was. My identity became defined by their disappointment. I genuinely started to believe I was clumsy, unintelligent, and lacking the intrinsic goodness that radiated effortlessly from Sarah. When I finally moved out for college, it wasn't a triumphant departure, it was a desperate escape. But even distance couldn't sever the umbilical cord of blame. If Sarah was upset about a friend, it was because I hadn't been supportive enough during my last visit. If Mom and Dad argued, it was probably stress caused by my sporadic, emotionally distant phone calls. My entire life, thousands of miles away, was still contextualized through the lens of their perceived victimhood, perpetuated by Sarah's subtle, heartbreaking-sounding updates. I remember my father trying once, weekly, to intervene. It was during a Christmas visit 5 years ago. I had just announced I was dating a wonderful woman named Clara. Mom, instead of offering congratulations, immediately looked skeptical. "Clara? That sounds like a lovely name, but Elias, you do attract damaged people. You need someone stable." I hope she's not like those other girls you used to bring home, demanding attention and disrupting the family quiet. I bit back the sharp retort that those demanding girls were simply the ones who asked why I always looked sad. Dad cleared his throat, fiddling with his watch. "Now, honey, Elias seems happy. We should trust his judgment." Mom turned on him instantly, her voice chilling. "Trust his judgment? John, are you forgetting the time he ruined our vacation to the coast when he was 16 by letting his sister get terribly sick because he forgot to pack the right medication? His judgment is exactly what got us into trouble then." It was a lie. A magnificent, cruel lie. Sarah had intentionally consumed contaminated water from a stream, dared by a group of local teenagers, and I had been the one to frantically drive her to the nearest clinic while Mom was asleep. Yet in Mom's revised history, I was responsible for Sarah's illness and the subsequent ruin of the vacation. Dad wilted instantly under the weight of the accusation. He couldn't challenge her. The memory of that manufactured drama was too strong. He simply nodded and retreated into the sports page, leaving me alone to face the silent, damning disapproval. That moment taught me that my father, the one person I thought held the key to fairness, was ultimately a coward, choosing peace over truth every single time. And that choice became his lasting penance. The stage for the climax was set last year, on Thanksgiving. It was always the worst holiday, a mandatory performance of familial bliss built upon years of resentment. The air was thick with the scent of sage and the unsaid. I flew in from the West Coast, dread weighing down my suitcase. Clara, bless her perceptive soul, had opted out this year, citing a conveniently timed flu. Sarah was there, of course, radiant as always. She had recently received a promotion and spent the first hour subtly detailing the incredible stress and dedication required for her new role, ensuring that every compliment she received landed as a gentle barb against my own less glamorous work in research. The tension finally snapped over something ridiculous: the ancient, ugly, hand-painted ceramic centerpiece, a hideous depiction of pilgrims eating a strangely purple turkey, which had belonged to my grandmother. The centerpiece was usually kept high on a shelf, but Sarah had brought it down for authenticity. As we moved from the living room to the dining room, Sarah suddenly stumbled. The centerpiece, clutched in her hands, slipped and crashed onto the hardwood floor, exploding into 100 sharp pastel shards. A terrible, suffocating silence descended. The centerpiece, clutched in her hands, slipped and crashed onto the hardwood floor, exploding into 100 sharp pastel shards.
A terrible, suffocating silence descended. Sarah immediately burst into tears, dramatically clutching her hand as if she had suffered a life-altering injury, though she was clearly unharmed. Mom rushed to her side, ignoring the mess. "Oh, my darling, are you cut?"
This is terrible. That piece meant so much to me. Then the inevitable turn, the moment the script flipped back to me, even though I had been 5 feet away, setting up chairs. "Elias, why were you distracting her? You know how clumsy you are. You probably brushed past her or made a loud noise. I swear, you can't just stand still, can you? You always have to be making trouble." Mom's voice was high-pitched, vibrating with years of stored anger that needed a vent. I looked at her, and something inside me, something I thought had died years ago, stirred. I felt a cold, calm certainty wash over the exhaustion. I was tired of being the villain in a story I hadn't written. "Mom, I didn't touch her. I didn't speak. I was stacking the chairs." My voice was low, flat, devoid of the defensiveness she usually expected. Sarah looked up from her theatrical weeping, her eyes shooting me a warning glare. "It's fine, Mom. Elias didn't mean to. He's just always so heavy-footed. He probably didn't realize how loud he was being near the china cabinet. I'll replace it, though. I know it won't be the same." And that was it? The subtle implication of my inherent clumsiness, followed by the gracious martyrdom of the golden child. It was the perfect performance. I finally snapped, but not in the way they expected. There was no shouting. There was just a quiet, profound weariness. "You know what, Sarah? Just stop. Stop pretending." Mom whirled on me.
"How dare you speak to your sister like that when she's clearly upset? Go to the porch, Elias. You've ruined the mood."
And then, a sound I hadn't heard in 2 decades. The sudden, loud scraping of a chair being pushed back. Not by me, but by Dad. Dad stood up, his face pale and drawn, looking older than his 60 years. He wasn't looking at me or Sarah. He was staring at Mom, and his eyes held a depth of grief I had never witnessed before. "He didn't ruin the mood, Mary. You did. We all did." His voice trembled, but it was steady in its conviction. Mom stared at him, bewildered. "John, what are you talking about? Are you defending him after he upset Sarah?" Dad ignored her, his eyes now sweeping over the mess of ceramic on the floor. "The vase. It's symbolic, isn't it? It's broken, and we're trying to blame the wrong person for the damage." He took a slow, deliberate breath, and what followed was the most agonizing, terrifying moment of honesty our family had ever endured. "I cannot do this anymore, Mary. I cannot watch you destroy our son." Mom laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "Destroy him? Elias is fine." "He's the one who is cold, who is always distant." "He's distant because we pushed him away with every breath we took." Dad's voice cracked, finally reaching a shouting volume. He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. "Sarah, you didn't stumble. I saw the whole thing. You were holding the vase, you looked right at Elias, and you dropped it. You dropped it deliberately because you knew Mom would blame him, and you needed to keep the narrative going." The room plunged into utter silence, broken only by Sarah's sudden, sharp intake of breath, her performance mask dissolving instantly into raw, panicked fear. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my body felt numb. This wasn't happening. Not Dad. Not after all this time. Dad continued, his voice softer now, but infinitely more damaging. And it wasn't just the vase, was it? It was the $20 when he was 8. Mary, the $20 wasn't lost. Sarah, you took it. I saw you put it back, crumpled, in your dollhouse drawer 2 weeks later. I meant to tell you, but you had grounded Elias so quickly, and Sarah cried so hard when I tried to bring it up, saying I was favoring Elias. You shut me down, Mary. You told me I had to be unified with you in discipline. Mom was shaking her head violently, tears now streaming down her face, the tears of a woman whose reality was crumbling around her. No, John, that's not true.
Sarah would never lie to me like that. She is my good girl. She is a good manipulator, Mary, Dad whispered, his own grief now echoing mine from all those years ago. Do you remember the physics grade? The paper she deleted? I saw her do it. She didn't think I was awake when she snuck out of her room, but I heard the keyboard.
I found the draft in the recycle bin a week later, and I held it up to you, and you said I was being paranoid. You told me Sarah was too stressed to lie. He walked slowly toward me, not touching me, but simply standing in front of me, a wall of apology 20 years too late. The coastal trip, Elias, when you were 16. She wasn't sick from the water. She knew she was being challenged by those teenagers, and she told them you had convinced her to drink it. She knew you'd take the blame to protect her from Mom's fury. I should have stood up then. I should have told the truth when it meant something. Instead, I let my own fear of disrupting the family dynamic turn me into a passive participant in your emotional abuse. The sheer volume of revelations, the concrete evidence laid bare after years of insidious suggestion and emotional violence, was overwhelming. My sister, the flawless Sarah, stood rigid, her face devoid of the tears she had moments before manufactured. Her true expression, a mixture of cold fury and panic, was terrifyingly alien. She opened her mouth, ready to deploy the familiar defense mechanism of tears and blame, but Dad cut her off immediately. Don't you dare, Sarah. Not today. Today, the silence is over. Mom collapsed onto a dining chair, her face buried in her hands, her world irrevocably shattered. Her favorite child, the symbol of her perfect parenting, was a liar and a framer. Her scapegoat, the son she had judged as unworthy, was the victim. The cognitive dissonance was catastrophic. I looked at Sarah one last time. She didn't look remorseful. She looked betrayed. Betrayed not because she was exposed, but because her primary enabler, my father, had defected. You've ruined everything, Dad, she spat, her voice tight with venom, not sorrow. You always wanted to be the hero, didn't you, Elias? Well, enjoy your moment. It changes nothing. She grabbed her coat and stormed out the door, the sound of the slam echoing the finality of her departure from this version of the family. I didn't chase her. I didn't feel rage or vindication. I felt an immense, staggering relief, coupled with a deep, aching sorrow for the lost years. I looked at my father, who was still standing there, tears leaking silently down his face, the weight of his long-delayed confession heavy on his shoulders. I'm sorry, Elias, he choked out. I failed you. I couldn't speak. I simply nodded, the gesture acknowledging not just the apology, but the enormous cost of his cowardice. The damage was done. The truth was out, but it hadn't magically healed the wounds. It had simply defined them. We stood there for what felt like an eternity. Dad, broken and repentant. Mom, in silent, crushing denial. And me, finally free of a mask I never chose to wear. The truth didn't bring resolution. It brought separation. The family dynamic had collapsed, shattered, just like the ceramic turkey on the floor, and there was no way to glue it back together. The realization that I was never the problem, that I had carried the shadow so Sarah could stand in the light, didn't automatically mend the years of internalized failure. It simply gave me permission to start rebuilding myself, brick by painful brick. The injustice was deep and systemic, and my parents' favoritism wasn't just a preference, it was an act of profound, life-altering negligence, driven by the desperation to maintain the illusion of perfection. Now, years later, I have built a life defined by authenticity and distance. My relationship with my parents is fragile, marked by cautious interaction and the lingering specter of what they did. Sarah rarely speaks to us. Her perfect world couldn't sustain the exposure. The moral of this story isn't about triumphant revenge. It's about the silent violence of family injustice.
It's about how easily a parent can choose a narrative over reality, and how much damage a scapegoat child carries for the convenience of others. My silence didn't protect the family. It protected the lie. Breaking that silence was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was the only way to save the only person who truly mattered, myself.
If you have ever felt like the villain in your own family story, if you have carried blame that didn't belong to you, if you have been gaslighted into believing your own pain was a defect, I need you to know this. You are not the problem. Your reality is valid. It is terrifying and liberating to speak the truth, but your freedom depends on it. Don't wait 20 years for someone else to validate your experience. If this story resonated with the silent burden you carry, please hit that like button, subscribe for more truth, and tell me in the comments below, not necessarily the whole story, but just the first time you realized you were wearing someone else's shame. It's time we put down the weight we were never meant to carry.